Okay, a couple of days ago I posted a video about outsourced quality assurance and more specifically a company called Quantic Lab. That story was given to me by a whistleblower who also allowed me to examine dozens of internal documents to prove their identity. My conclusion was that this person does have insider knowledge and is speaking from a position of authority, so I collaborated with them to create a video. In that video, there were three main points of interest. First, Quantic Lab had a team of junior testers working on Cyberpunk 2077 after being contracted for a quality assurance project. Second, Quantic decided to implement a bug quota for specific sections of the game, which led to a massive influx of low priority issues as inexperienced testers tried to meet that requirement. And third, for multiple other projects, Quantic Lab was allegedly making false representations about team size during and beyond 2019 and 2020. That video has begun to make the rounds on gaming news websites. It started in Forbes, written about by Paul Tassi, moved on to be copied and pasted on probably dozens of other websites, from Kotaku Australia to Screen Rant and beyond. And watching that happen has once again underlined precisely how flawed gaming journalism has become, and requires me to issue some clarifications. I don't need to clarify because my initial coverage was wrong. I need to clarify because the media game of telephone has started to get a little bit out of control with the story. I've talked about this before, but the way gaming media and legacy media in general, it seems, has begun to operate resembles a children's game of telephone. One child says a word or a phrase, the next one repeats what they heard, around you go, time after time, and eventually the last one in the circle repeats the phrase out loud. Anyone who has played this game will probably know that you almost always end up with gibberish or a completely different phrase, and the issue is that incremental change with each repeated iteration leads to a degradation in the raw information. It's a mouthful, I know, but it's true. Basically, by the time you reach the end of the circle, no one knows what the fuck is going on, and the initial phrase is completely lost. That's a much more extreme, but in my opinion also fairly accurate example of how media has come to operate in recent years. And today I need to just jump right in as the whispers go around and clarify a few specific things. Let's begin with Forbes. Credit to Paul Tassi, he was the first one to pick up on this story by far and obviously has his ear to the ground in the gaming space, so credit where credit is due. I also like a lot of his work and wanted to ensure that everyone knows this is not an indictment of his abilities. If anything, it's a simple recognition that my rhetoric was misunderstood, which led to the first discrepancy in the chain. Most of this is perfectly on point, but one specific section reads, quote, Quantic Lab over-exaggerated the size of the team working on Cyberpunk 2077 in order to keep the contract, end quote. That's not precisely true, and I hope that my initial verbiage did not get misconstrued that way. While it is alleged by my source that Quantic Lab misrepresented team size on multiple other projects during the same time frame and period of time and beyond, Cyberpunk 2077 was their crown jewel, if you will, and they had a full team working on it as a result of that. A full but utterly inexperienced team, admittedly, but still a full number of team members for that particular project. That's the first link in the chain, but now every single further publication that directly copies from Forbes, which is a large number, is going to misrepresent that information. There were quite a few articles that simply quoted the Forbes summary, thus regurgitating something that was not precisely accurate in terms of which particular teams were understaffed. And even further, there were articles that then began pulling from the summary and misrepresenting who was the original party that allegedly implemented the bug quota. To be extremely clear, according to my source, Quantic Lab implemented the quota, not CD Projekt Red. Now, these kinds of clarifications aren't major or story defining, but what does have a pretty major impact is perception of motive. In the aftermath of Cyberpunk 2077's disastrous launch, Marcin Iwinski, co-founder, published a sort of apology video of sorts, and in that video he said the following.
Every change and improvement needed to be tested, and as it turned out, our testing did not show a big part of the issues you experienced while playing the game.
This drew widespread criticism in the moment, and there was a mistaken sense of outrage I have seen with regards to this type of statement and my own previous coverage, where some people feel I am attempting to whitewash the culpability of CD Projekt Red. That's not actually the case. I stated firmly, in point-blank terms, that poor leadership and mismanagement largely contributed. Shareholder expectations, erroneous and damaging development timelines, developer crunch, all of this plays a part. And of course, on a basic level, the development team was aware that the product was broken. Anyone with a brain was aware that it wasn't ready for launch. But quality assurance encountering this type of issue, according to my source, played a significant role in the product ultimately being released in a condition even worse than it otherwise would have had the process been streamlined. Now, very recently on Twitter, Legacy Killer HD has claimed that he spoke with CD Projekt Red developers, or at least one, who claim it's laughable that they didn't know what was going on or that the game was broken, which would seem to contradict at least partially the claims made by Marcin Iwinski in his official response. But here's the thing though, it's entirely possible for all of these angles to be true at once simultaneously. Bear with me, but here's a bit of a personal theory. What if the majority of testing was done on high-end machines? I have extensive anecdotal statements of my own from viewers about the drastic difference between experience from PC to console. The PC high-end developer systems create a sort of intrinsic bias in the process, and if console testing was primarily outsourced, you can have a situation where, yes, developers know the game is broken, yes, management knows as well, but simply mandates the product be released at a specific time, for the holidays actually, but despite knowing it is broken, they don't precisely know how, to the full extent they could, or at the very least have significantly less information on the specifics of how, which is to say, less than they would with a more streamlined QA process, and a breakdown in experience as well as efficacy on the QA side may have contributed to all of this heavily. Many people seem to be viewing this as a statement of totality. If not for Quantic Lab, the game would have been great, but that's an asinine thought process, and my original video made no such indication toward that end. According to my source, a significant breakdown in quality assurance contributed to the flaws that were then even directly cited by the co-founder of the company, perhaps as a combined result of platform bias, I'm not sure. Here's the thing though, that video, even if some people seem to be negligently or perhaps intentionally misrepresenting or misinterpreting it, opened the floodgates of information. I have to play a delicate game right now because in the aftermath I've been inundated with messages and emails that contain a lot of confidential information. This is an Icarus situation, I guess. I want to put it all out there, while protecting sources of course, but I would be sued into oblivion, right? It's that type of information that goes that deep and that quantity. I don't just have sources in Quantic Lab now. I've talked with people that do QA for Electronic Arts, Bethesda, and even leakers who have extensive internal information from CD Projekt Red themselves, not just Quantic Lab. Some of those sources describe a relatively similar situation at other companies, while some state that an army of monkeys, as they are referred to, not my term or my words, that was the nickname given at a specific studio, do low-level QA work while internally a high-level and highly skilled team tackles different problems. The variance between QA companies is quite high, it seems, and while some call it the worst experience of their entire life, others view it to be a simple stepping stone with no real controversy attached. From industry veterans to brand new hires, I have well over a dozen open email chains right now as I type this, with additional Discord messages, tons of them, and calls scheduled over the next few days to learn about the chain of events, more about QA in general, and get to the bottom of what the situation entailed. Furthermore, I was given a screenshot internally of Quantic Lab's corporate response to all this, and it seems that they are perhaps considering legal action. That is, of course, entirely expected. I went into this knowing that that was likely going to be their response, but I stand by my initial video, and I am fully confident that further information will come out very soon. I was also contacted by a Romanian news network claiming to be the largest television network in the entire country. They wanted to interview me, and I decided to decline that, but made sure my source was aware that they are interested in the story. It's not my place to go on major network TV stations for interviews. That's not what this was all about. And if we can get past the surface level animosity and emotion that permeates the subject of Cyberpunk 2077 to this very day, there is something to dig into here. Reporting on all this is actually becoming rather tricky. Many of the people I talk to with the most access to information have the most fear of penalty, and thus they request anonymity. My answer is always yes when they say this, but that comes with its own set of issues. People who want to debate the specifics on what degree of impact this had with regards to Cyberpunk 2077 are welcome to do so. I don't care. But with Quantic Lab in mind, my gut tells me this goes a lot deeper than that. To summarize this follow-up, Cyberpunk 2077 was one of the largest projects that Quantic Lab has ever been given. Apparently, CD Projekt Red developers are telling another YouTuber that their role was minimal, which I really can't speak to at this time, but I don't care, because within that role, whatever scope it entailed, there was a breakdown in process, as well as expectation, that led to a disjointed and ultimately inferior QA result, according to my source. When reporting on this, several inaccuracies have surfaced, such as the idea that the Cyberpunk 2077 QA team size was lied about. That's not accurate. It was other projects at that time, and into the future, where misrepresentations were made to secure or extend contracts. Another claim I saw was that the bug quota was implemented by CD Projekt Red, which is also not true. This was a policy within Quantic Lab only, and though the majority of the information stands as is, we will undoubtedly see quite a bit more come out in the short term, which will build out the story further. In the end, yes, the buck stops with the company that literally sells the product. Obviously. me, you, media, YouTubers, anyone, everyone is incapable of pretending that there is some kind of magical justification that unilaterally explains why and how this game launched in a terrible condition, such a terrible condition. But in a story that is rapidly becoming something much bigger, and a story that I will likely dig into far more in depth over the coming weeks, Quantic Lab has allegedly contributed to that process and also faces its own set of controversies going forward. My email is down below. It's a bit overwhelmed at the moment, and I will do my best to respond to everything in a timely fashion, but I'm going to continue looking at all this because I believe there is a story far bigger beneath the surface. That's it. If you want to support, there are links down below: Locals, Patreon, Odyssey, merch, social media, another YouTuber, etc., etc. But I'll cut it there and stop rambling. As always, thank you all for watching, and have a nice night.